This lesson is for FST Lesson 5-5, the law of sines. The law of sines is given to you here. The sine of an angle divided by the side across from it is equal to the side of another angle divided by the side across from it. So it's real important that you know that the capital letters here are angles, the lowercase letters are side lengths, and those angles and sides have a relationship. Before we get into that law of sines real deeply, we need to take a slight detour to the SAS triangle area formula. So when you're working with a triangle in this chapter, if they ask you for the area, this is the one exception to all the other rules that we've been learning. This is the only time they'll ask you for area, and it's the only time that they're going to ask you area is when they give you two sides and the angle between them. So notice the question here, find the area of, and they give you this triangle. Notice that they are giving you two sides and the angle between them. The formula for the SAS triangle area formula is 1/2 times A times B times the sine of C. The letters are drawn here purposely. The A and the B values are side lengths, and the C value is the angle that's given. So the SAS is, these are the two sides, and this is the angle. So if we were to label everything here, this would be the angle, and then the A and the B value, those are interchangeable. Those could be either A or B or B or A. So now that you've got all the things labeled, you simply just calculate. So we're going to do 1/2 times 7 times 8 times the sine of the 30-degree angle. Now you would, unless this is a value on your unit circle, you would have to use your calculator to get this value, and you would be allowed to round it off. Let's go ahead and have you in degree mode on your calculator type all of that in. You can type it in one big strip or one big long line. You should not need any parentheses. If the calculator forces you to do parentheses, it would just be around the angle measure here. So if you round this off to the nearest whole number, you should get about 14. Since these are labeled in centimeters, we would say centimeters squared. Whenever you're working with area, it's labeled with a square. So if you see a question that asks you about area, most likely it'll be an SAS situation, and this will be the formula that you use. You do need to memorize it, 1/2 AB times the sine of C. There is no SAS triangle area formula for cosine, you'll only use sine. So let's get into the law of sines. There are three situations that you may encounter for the law of sines. Remember that when we talked about the law of cosines, there were only two situations for that. Basically, you'll use law of sines for everything else. Typically, it'll be for angle, angle, side, or for angle, side, angle. There will be some situations where you'll have side, side, angle. Be careful there that you don't spell a naughty word. And we'll talk a little bit more about this one later on. So again, the formula itself is sine of an angle divided by the side across from it is equal to the same thing on another part of the triangle. Sine of another angle divided by the side across from it. Typically, they're going to give you 3 of these 4 items, and you will cross multiply to solve. So here's our first example. They gave you 2 angles and the side of 400. They're asking you to find side x. So the first thing you want to do is try to find relationships between angles and sides that are across from each other. So clearly here the 40-degree angle and the x are an angle and a side that are across from each other. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to say sine of 40 degrees divided by x. Common mistake here is for kids to put the x on the top and the 40 on the bottom. Make sure that when you're working with the angle, that always goes on the top next to the word sine. Then know that we also have 400 across from this unknown angle. Since that's the only other side that we're given, we have to use it. And since we don't know this angle here, we might need to go ahead and figure out what that angle would be. You'll use your geometry skills here and do 180 minus the 2 angles that are given. And hopefully when you calculate that, you should get a 30-degree angle. So even though we didn't know that angle, we were able to use our geometry skills to find it. We have to use that angle because it's across from the only other side that they gave us. So I'm going to set up the rest of my law of sines as sine of 30 divided by 400. Keep in mind that if these two fractions were flip-flopped, you could have the sine of 30 over 400 equals the sine of 40. So you could have started with these two values and gotten the same answer. So now to solve this, we will cross multiply. And when you cross multiply, it's very important to remember that the bottom numbers need to go in front. And I'll illustrate why here in just a moment. If we were to multiply here the 400 times the sine of 40, if we did sine of 40 times 400, it's unclear here if we should do the sine of 40 or if we should multiply 40 times 400 first. So to avoid that issue of what to do first, it's so much simpler just to say 400 times the sine of 40. Now there is no question about what's going to happen here. You have to take the sine of 40 and you're going to multiply it by 400. We don't need to question if the 400 and the 40 go together. Keep your equal sign the same, and then you do the other pairing. Remember that the bottom number should go in front, so you're going to say x sine 30. Now all you're going to do from here is solve using your algebra skills. So in this case, the x is on this side. To get the x alone, we would divide by the sine of 30. You should be able to simply type in this portion on your calculator and make sure that you're in degree mode. If you type all of that in, you should get the answer of about 514. When you're doing these, just make sure that you pay attention to what they tell you to round to. Let's do another example. Another thing that they may ask you to do is solve the triangle. Keep in mind that when they ask you to solve the triangle, that means you have to find any and every other missing length and or angle. So if they ask you to solve, that means you're in for the long haul. You have lots of things you need to come up with, including everything that's missing. So first we're just going to set up the problem here. We're going to start by looking for angles and sides that are across from each other. So I've got one set there, and I've got another set here. So that means I'm going to have to find the angle measure for B. I'm going to have to find side length AC. Since those pieces are missing. First I'm going to set up a law of sines problem. My sine of 35 over the 6.5. And then I'm going to take the 10 and angle C. Sine of angle C I don't know, so I'm going to have to find the measurement of that angle. First I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to put the 10 in front of the sine of 35 degrees. Keep my equal sign the same. 6.5 goes in front, and then I have sine of C. The variable that I'm trying to find is the C. To get the C alone, I'm going to have to move the 6.5 and the sine. I'm going to move the 6.5 first by dividing. And when I divide there, we get about 0.88, approximately. And on this side, I still have the sine of C. Now what you'll have to do here to get the sine to go away is you'll have to use an inverse sine. So we're going to do the inverse sine on this side. So keep that long number that was on your calculator. Don't just use 0.88. Use whatever you got when you divided over here. Take the inverse sine of that answer. Technically, you are doing the inverse sine of both sides. So I'm going to move that over so that I have room to write it. So inverse sine here. The inverse signs on this side end up canceling out, leaving us what the C value is. And then we're able to come up with that angle measure. That angle measure is a 62-degree angle. So that's the measurement of angle C. I still need to find the measurement of angle B. So I'm going to do that next. Measure of angle B is going to be 180 minus the angle that was given minus angle C, which I just found. And when I do that, I should get 83. So the measure of angle B is 83 degrees. So now I'm going to use the measure of that angle to find the side across from angle B. So I'm going to reuse the angle and the side across from each other that were there originally. So that would be these values here. So I'm going to take sine of 35 degrees divided by 6.5. And then I'm going to do the sine of 83 degrees, my new angle B, divided by, I'm going to say little b there. So now I'm going to cross multiply to solve that to find the other length. Remember, we're still trying to solve the triangle. We're trying to find everything else that's missing. So I'm going to cross multiply here. So I get b sine 35 equals 6.5 sine 83. Trying to get the b alone, so I'm simply going to divide by sine 35 on both sides. Again, you'll simply type all of this in on your calculator. On this side, we'll get what the b value is. And we should get the number about 11.2. Now, technically, we could be done at this point. However, there is a issue with the law of sines that we need to cover, and that has to do with the fact that back here, I said that sometimes when you're dealing with SSA, when you're finding that missing angle, sometimes we have issues. So I want to go back to this problem and revisit one idea. It is possible that this triangle was drawn incorrectly. It is possible that this triangle may have looked like this instead. We have a 10 here, angle is 35, this is 6.5. It is very possible that that angle is not acute. It could possibly be obtuse. So the way that we get around that and try to figure that out is we take the idea that supplements to sine angles also may work. So remember, when you're dealing with the inverse sine, you're dealing with angles between 0 and 180. So if we get one angle of 62, its supplement may also exist. So we would have to check that and figure out if the supplement to 62 also works in the triangle. So we're going to do 180 minus 62 to find the possible alternate value. So that means that angle B could either be 83 degrees or 118 degrees. Let's see if that makes sense. The measure of angle B was 180 minus, not or 180, sorry. Measure of angle B could come from the 35 that was there, or the 118, 62 or 118 was supposed to be here at C. So if we calculate that, that would mean that angle B could have been the 83 that we came up with, or the 27 degree angle that it could have been. So there's actually two angles for B and two angles for C. So what that does then is it affects our ability to calculate the missing side as well. So we could have redone this problem with a 27 instead. So if you recalculate this whole thing, you don't need to rewrite it, just put the other angle right up above, 27 degree angle there. Then you get your other answer for side B as also being a possible 5.1. I know that that's hard for kids to deal with, but it's because of the fact that inverse sine typically has two answers. If you think about it on the unit circle, when you're at 30 degrees for sine versus 150 degrees for sine, those two could have the same outcome. So sine values are supplementary to each other, meaning that there's two answers that are the same. So I want to show you this in one more example, this example here. So if we set up a law of sine problem here, we've got the sine of 75 is across from side 11, and the sine of the y angle that we don't know is across from the 9. If we cross multiply here, we get 9 sine 75 equals 11 sine y. Trying to get the y alone here, we would divide by 11 on both sides. Calculating here, we get about 0.79 is equal to the sine of y. Take the inverse sine of everything. When we take the inverse sine here, we get about 52 degrees for the y value, or for the angle. Now if we verify the supplement to that, 180 minus what we just got, we would get the value of 128. Now on this one, we need to check for it, but on this one we're going to say that that doesn't work. If you think about angle y having two values of either being 52 or 128, remember that the angle that was given was the 75. 75 and 128, if you add those together, you're not going to have enough room for angle P. So on this one, we test for it, or we try to find it, but know that the supplement on this one doesn't work. So on some problems, you're going to test for that alternate answer, like we did on angle C here. It had two answers, 62 or 118, but know that sometimes that alternate answer doesn't exist or doesn't work. But you do need to always check for it or look for it.